just real quick, I'm James Faulk. I'm a reporter from KEET-TV in Eureka, California. We're a rather small market PBS affiliate. I host a show on the television channel called Headline Humboldt, which is a public affairs show based around Humboldt County, California, Redwood Country, basically.
Yep.
As part of that, and as part of my own interests, I've gotten I guess you could say addicted to this subject, in part because of you, because of your great writing books, or your great books.
You have my
And
condolences. Yeah.
yeah, no,
Sorry.
it's been a journey, that's for sure. But so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because I respect your scholarship and the way that you approach the subject. You're not positing any answers necessarily, but you're looking at like the broad spectrum of things that sort of intersect with the phenomenon and how they all may play a role in an understanding that we need to reach in order to get to a better place with this subject. I just have some questions, and we can just run through them if you don't mind, or
Please.
okay, great. So first off, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to the issues that have been in the public sphere these last few weeks, with whistleblower David Grush going before Congress. And that obviously was a major change from the way things have been. We haven't had that level of attention or respect for the subject. It remains to be seen whether people are accepting it or not, but being as you are near ground zero in terms of where this movement began with To the Stars and Tom DeLonge, what were your thoughts as you saw the testimony of David Grush and Fravor and Ryan as they were talking about their experiences?
Well, it was kind of a rush in one aspect, because here it is, we finally got to that point. And this was a public hearing so that anybody could listen in and make up their own minds about what they were hearing. We all knew that Grush was somebody who would prove himself to be extremely credible as an insider, as somebody who had access to the details of these programs. We had Christopher Mellon also, who's part of To the Stars in the very beginning, who also had that kind of access as part of as an undersecretary of defense. So there was, this idea that we're talking to people who know, who can't always say what they know. But in Grush's case, he got cleared to say the things that he did. And that's a major thing. I mean, it all started in 2017 with that famous New York Times article.
Yeah.
And at that point, we felt, okay, the ball is now rolling. We're not going to put the genie back in the bottle, to keep mixing all these metaphors, but it's out now. I mean, people are going to try to say, I haven't seen much, there's no proof. Show me a dead alien, maybe I'll pay attention. We're not there at this point. Where we're at is way beyond where we were, I mean, just 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, there were other hearings, obviously. Steve Bassett very famously had a hearing. There were all these things that happened. People were out there talking, but there was it wasn't at the level of a Grush and a Favor and a Ryan. I mean, these are all guys who said, listen, we saw it, or in Grush's case, we saw the documents, we talked to the witnesses, we talked to people that had extremely high security clearances. We know that there's something out there that we have to pay attention to. The To the Stars group, when we started, was, as you recall, it was former CIA guy, Department of Defense guy. We had, of course, Hal Puthoff, who's just like the OG of all this stuff.
Yeah.
So we have all these guys who really were there, who could not tell us what they knew. The funny thing is, we had To the Stars, and we had all these guys who knew what was going on, or who had a pretty good idea of what was going on, and they still couldn't tell us. Sure. So Tom and I, we don't have security clearances. I mean, I don't know about Tom. I'm just assuming he doesn't. I don't. So it's like they couldn't talk to us. They couldn't even talk to us in a skiff. I mean, it was like, this is, we know what's happening. We're going to kind of steer this in the right direction, and then you guys carry the ball forward and see what can happen. So it's all these things were going through your head, and there's Grush just calmly laying it all out.
Yeah, in a sudden rush of information.
Yeah, and it's like, whoa, what? And then there were all the naysayers out there saying, well, I don't know, I'm not convinced. I mean, like Chris Mellon used to say at the very beginning of this project, when will they take yes for an answer? I
Yeah.
mean, they're telling you, yes, you were right. Tom was right. Aliens exist. All of this was right. We're telling you, yes, let's go to the next phase now. Let's go to the next step. Let's get these hearings underway. Let's get some of these documents declassified. Let's get some of these people on the record publicly. And then we can, we can do something about this. I'm going to shut this off here. It's making too much noise. Okay. Are we back? Yes. So for us, I mean, for me, just watching it, it was, another vindication. I mean, the New York Times article was vindication, as far as I was concerned. The cat's out of the bag. So, but this hearing was extremely important, and it's just the first of a lot of different disclosures that are coming. So, we know there's a lot more. My issue with all of this is a little different, I think, from some people's, and that is, I'm a little confused as to a number of things. One is the very American or United States centric aspect of this. We're acting like we're the only ones who know what's going on, or have access to the materials, or have access to the intelligence about this. We know that other countries do as well.
Yeah.
What's confusing is how come nobody else is doing this yet? Why isn't China? Why isn't Russia? I mean, they have come out individually in bits and pieces. They've revealed things. The Soviets in the old Soviet era, they were as concerned about this as we were. They may have had even a little edge on us in certain ways. They were actually reporting, they were finding ways of getting the attention of this phenomenon.
And efforts of communication and stuff, right? I mean, yeah.
So, there's that going on. So for the United States government to say, well, we can't talk about this, this is secret, and yet everybody has a cell phone and everybody has high, HD cameras, and they're pointed at the sky and they're picking stuff up, and they have advanced communications in the hands of normal human beings, you're not going to keep this secret for very much longer. So it's about time to, come clean, guys, as far as we can. I understand from a security point of view, we don't want other countries to know exactly what we know, because they may realize we don't know as much as we think we know. They may have an edge. They may have a missing piece. We want their missing pieces before we reveal our missing piece. I understand that mentality. But that's a Defense Department mentality. We also have the mentality of people who work in religious studies, in philosophy, in psychology, in the sciences. They need to be brought in. They need to be read in. We need to figure this out really quickly, because if something happens, if something lands on the White House lawn, the famous thing, we've got to be prepared. We can't just sit there and start the ball rolling then. We've got to have a lot of options and a lot of ways of viewing this and handling the information. And I don't think we have that yet. There's just not enough people involved, not enough regular people involved, not enough people from other countries, from other ethnicities. This sounds, sometimes I know I get into these arguments with people and they think, well, you're just trying to be a liberal about this. You're talking about diversity. I mean, guys, this is not about trying to be politically correct. This is about, there are people out there with pieces of this information.
Yeah.
We don't have.
Well,
and they don't know they have it.
Yeah.
Right? And we don't know. And we've got to get them talking. We've got to get these people in Brazil, for instance. We've got to talking to them seriously. And people in other countries. I mean, Africa, there's a whole continent of people who have had these experiences, and we're kind of ignoring them because they're not in academia or they're not part of our defense establishment. We've got to stop that. We've got to start talking to people like they're human beings and try to figure out what they know, because we need to know this.
There's some follow-up questions I'd love to ask about that, the racial thing that you were just mentioning, having to do with, Adamski and the whole, like, potentially, I mean, some people say the Nazi origins of some of these phenomenons, which is something I'd like to dive into a little bit. I mean, I think that may have been an early direction of the whole phenomenon, and it seems to have gone away from that. But is that still a risk? And there are people who still look at this whole issue through that kind of rubric, which could potentially damage, the acceptance factor.
Well, this is part of the problem that we face in Congress. I mean, if you watch the hearings, the Republican side, the conservative side was all in. The Democrat side and the progressives were very cautious about it for a number of reasons. One was the racial aspect, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's just too easy to go there.
Yeah.
The Roswell incident, for instance, was at one point widely considered by people in various defense agencies to have been a prototype Nazi weapon, right?
Yeah.
Maybe this was a German. I mean, it looked like the drawings that Kenneth Arnold gave us looked like the flying wings that were being developed by the Horton brothers under the Nazi regime. Maybe it was almost identical in shape.
Yeah.
So there was this idea that maybe the Arnold sightings and Roswell all connected. Maybe this was some Nazis somewhere in South America or someplace were doing this. So that opened the door to this idea and the Foo Fighter phenomenon during World War II. Do the Nazis, and maybe in the case of the Asia Pacific, even the Japanese, was there some kind of did the fascist and the Nazi right wing have access to some sort of extraterrestrial stuff, I mean, or some advanced technology? So the Nazi thing has always been percolating, and Adamski with his Venusians and everything, that just contributed to the whole thing. And Adamski was popular; he was kind of famous for a while in the 50s. And then what came out of that? You had George Hunt Williamson. You had all these guys coming out who were fascist or who were proto-fascist, right?
Yeah, the silver shirts and whatnot.
Silver shirts and Pelly, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So they sort of carved out this piece of real estate for their own. It was very Morning of the Magicians, if you remember that.
Yeah,
book.
absolutely.
So it was kind of like in that area, and they sort of staked out that claim. And if you were liberal, if you were anti-fascist, if you were, sort of flag-waving American, type of person in the old concept of what being an American was, patriotic and all of that, this was hideous. And there was also the other aspect that Congress has a problem with, especially on the left, I believe. And that is the idea that UFOs are not scientific.
Yeah.
We've had such a problem with science, especially during COVID, with people attacking science, people who know nothing about medicine or about science, attacking it, saying it's a hoax or it's a conspiracy or it's the deep state or whatever.
Yeah, and so people continue to bring that to it when they are looking at this. Is this another facet of that same kind of argument, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Democrats are saying, in general, Democrats, let's call them small d Democrats, people on the other side of this argument are saying, well, if it's not scientific, then let those guys have it because they don't like science, so they'll have the unscientific stuff. UFOs are probably not scientific. If we buy into that, we're buying into a whole bunch of stuff we don't really want to buy into.
Yeah.
I listened to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for instance. Cortez. She had a reel, I think, on Instagram. She was talking about, they asked her, bluntly, you were there, during the hearings. All she brought up was, well, we don't trust the defense establishment. There's a lot of corruption in the defense establishment. They have a huge budget. And it was like a conspiracy theory again, like this must be about the defense people trying to raise money, by creating a threat where none exists. And she didn't come out quite and say that, as I recall, but she was leading in that direction, right? And that seems to be, and we're not going to get anywhere this way. We have to have somebody saying that this does bear scientific scrutiny, that there is something that we need to know about this, and we need to know about it quickly, because there's a feeling in the establishment that I've been picking up that there's something coming, that there's another shoe that has to drop. And we've got to be prepared for that, as I keep saying, and I've been saying for years. We have to be prepared for this. We have to look at this with open eyes and stop this divide. It's scientific, it's not scientific, it's real, it's not real. It's extraterrestrials flying in from Mars or something, Neil deGrasse Tyson is constantly harping on this, concept, and he doesn't get it, or he deliberately doesn't get it, what we're talking about. Perhaps they've been here for thousands or millions of years. Perhaps this is a race living alongside us that we simply can't see for whatever reason. And he's going to raise his arguments scientifically, and that's great. We welcome that. Let's get it all together. Let's put it all on the table with Avi Loeb and with everybody else. Let's all sit down and talk about it. What is and is not possible. And get to the next step in this.
Now, I wrote a piece recently about this very issue, and it was published on Medium, so like 4 people read it, but I was proud of it. Anyway, I'll link it in the description. This is cheap advertising, but it was exactly that. I had interviewed a congressman on my show, Headline Humboldt, and I posed the question, David Grush, the hearings, what are your thoughts? And his response was angry. Like, he was not brooking any of the nonsense, quote unquote, that this represents. And I pointed out to him, and you just mentioned this, and maybe I was mistaken in my take, but basically, is it okay to build a coalition of folks who want transparency, even though some of them may be doing it because they don't trust the Pentagon, or they don't trust the American intelligence establishment, or the corporations that make the billions and billions of dollars off of defense money? If they are after transparency, even if they think it's going to put the UFO topic to bed. Like, if people are, think that, like, I don't care, or I don't think it's true, and I think it's done a lot of damage to American society, so let's get to the bottom of it, radical transparency, even though starting out, I am a non-believer. Is it possible that a coalition of that sort could be useful?
I think so, if they're all sitting together and having to deal with each other, not through a social media medium, right?
Well, yeah,
tweeting at each other. That's not working, right?
That's a thing of the past, right? Almost.
Yeah. Almost, yeah.
Yeah.
What we need to do is get people sitting together face to face and hear the arguments. Be civil about it. Give everybody equal time. Give the Neil deGrasse Tysons of the world equal time to sit there and say their piece, right? But then give the Avi Loeb people their piece, and give David Grush and everybody else their piece of it. Try to sit in front of David Grush or Fravor and tell them you're nuts. I want to see somebody do that, right? I want to see somebody challenge this. I mean, but they're not. They're doing it from a safe distance. And is it possible? I hope so, because even the naysayers, we're in this funny world where, the QAnon people don't trust the government. They don't trust the defense establishment. They don't trust the FBI, the DOJ, all the rest of it. But then we've got people on the left saying exactly the same thing and using that as they don't want to talk about UFOs, right?
Yeah.
Other people do want to talk about UFOs. The thing is, yes, we have been lied to by the government. Yes, Virginia, there is people who lie to you from the government.
Yeah.
There are politicians who lie. There's people in the intelligence establishment and the defense establishment. They've been dissembling for a long time over this. They kind of have to. They have lied to us during the Cold War, right? They lied to us for a variety of reasons. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. We can
there's a long list of lies.
Sure. And I get it.
Startling,
right? I 100% get it. But at some point, if you want disclosure, where's it going to come from? It's going to come from those people who were lying to you previously.
Yeah.
And if you've read my books, if you've read Sinister Forces,
absolutely.
I'm very cynical about government. I'm very cynical about a lot of things.
Yeah.
I don't buy into. I'm not an establishment person. But that said, I'm also an historian, and I've watched the changes that have taken place in our defense establishment, in our intelligence establishment. Not great, not 100%, squeaky clean, but there's probably more lawyers at Langley than there are secret agents right now. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's this idea that you can't do certain things. You will get caught. You will get prosecuted. Not like the old days, in the Wild West days of the 50s and 60s, where we're just running around overthrowing governments with reckless abandon.
Yeah.
And, doing stuff like MK Ultra and stuff in the United States. This stuff can't go on anymore, and it doesn't. There's so much scrutiny. Yeah. So we've got to take a breath and start dealing with people as if we're living in the 21st century now. We have a lot of baggage. Obviously we do, especially the intelligence and defense establishments. They've all done hideous things. But now we've got to push these people. These are still Americans. They're still our people. They're still citizens. They're not robots. They're not machines. They've grown up the way we did. A lot of the people that I've come across in my life as people who were in FBI or CIA, they joined after all this stuff happened. They joined long after the assassinations and the government overthrows and everything. And they have an idealistic idea, realistic, but at the same time, idealistic idea of what they're doing. They're defending the country. In their eyes, they're defending the country.
Yeah.
And they're not, rabid right or left-wing ideologues of any kind. They're trying to deal with a massive amount of information, trying to parse it and figure out how to best to defend the country against enemies, foreign and domestic.
Yeah.
So we just take a breath, and give some people the benefit of a doubt, at least listen to what they have to say. When they're coming out and saying, yes, there were UFOs, we know there's UFOs, we know there's this UAP phenomenon that we've been talking about. There are documents, there are people, there's even physical evidence. We have to take a breath, stop and listen and see how far it goes. We have to. Otherwise, we're just bloviating.
Yeah.
We've got nothing else, right? All we've
Yeah.
got are opinions at that point. We need something to work with.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if, I mean, some of that messaging would be more effective if it was coming from someone who was currently inside the government. A lot of these folks have retired or have had to come out in order to talk about it, Elizondo, and but at what point is the government itself going to be reaching out, do you think? Is that going to happen? Do you see that? Like with where we're at now, are we inching toward the point where Biden or his successor is going to come out in front of the dais and say, hey, look, we have to have a conversation?
We're inching towards it. The problem that we have with that is, what are they going to say? I mean, what is the real substance of what they can tell us?
Yeah,
We don't know. That's the problem.
exactly right. Exactly right.
You know, we just don't know. Are they going to come out and say, yes, Tom was right, aliens exist, which is a meme that's going around now?
No, I saw that. Yeah, yeah, and it's true. I mean, you know, we'll see
Yeah,
about some of it, but he was on point.
he was. And is he, you know, is
As
that,
were you.
but is that what it is? Is that, you know, are they going to come out and do that? Are they, what is it? What is the freaking phenomenon? This is the problem that I have. The other problem that I have that I started off with was that, why is it only a government that would know?
Yeah.
Does this phenomenon, I mean, there's the hints of this throughout, beginning with the famous Majestic 12, you know, stuff. And those hints that it might have been a bunch of government peoples that somehow knew a lot more.
Yeah.
Or who were somehow in contact with the other. Let's just call it the other.
Yeah.
How does that work? How would the other know or respect that kind of contact with a high level, one country's government, talk to them and say, we'll tell you stuff as long as you keep it secret? How does that work?
Yeah.
Right? I can't get my head around that. And I just had a conversation with somebody from To the Stars about exactly this. I can't get my head around this. There's this insistence that the government knows. Why is it just the government? Do they, the others, understand about American
Politics. Yeah.
politics and the hierarchical structure and all the rest of it? How did that happen? Because if that's happening, then for sure they can land on the White House lawn, right?
Yeah. There's no barrier at that point. Yeah.
I've been on the assumption for many years studying this that there is no such thing, right? That the other just shows up whenever it wants to show up and goes away when it wants to go away. And there's no high level contacts between, like, the president of the United States and, you know, an alien emissary or something. I never really bought into that, because the alien, whatever it is, must be so alien
Yeah.
that would not look at one of us as being any different from any other, or
Yeah.
any
It's
one
like,
human organization is different.
how would we even communicate? It's like the whole thing about, well, like, dolphins may be highly intelligent, but we have no way to have a conversation with them because we have no common frame of reference.
No.
You know, so it's like the same thing would exist with an extra terrestrial intelligence, or one from Earth that we have never communicated with, you know?
Exactly. I mean, if you study history, you study when foreign countries go to other invaders go to foreign countries, you know, the lack of communication is a huge problem. And that's just between humans.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even imagine. And I've written about this. The communication problem seems to be almost insurmountable, except now we have to go back to the contactees, which are the last people anybody wants to talk about. But
Yeah.
the contactees, they kind of insist over and over again that there's a telepathic form of communication. They see things in pictures. So that's a bit more digestible, I think, as an idea. If they're picking pictures and we're picking pictures and we're communicating with pictures and not words.
Yeah.
The aliens that have been described have virtually no mouths and no ears. There's, you know, from the point of view of psychology, I'm looking at this as we're trying to understand that these beings do not speak and they do not hear. And as I said in another thing that I wrote, the aliens don't sing.
Yeah.
There's no music with the aliens, or at least not that we can understand. Very large eyes, but virtually nothing else as a sensory apparatus. So the eyes imply vision, imply sight and pictures. So it's consistent. The contactees are consciously or unconsciously consistent in their descriptions of these contacts.
Yeah.
They're consistent, you know, in terms of the biology. So I'm thinking maybe that's how it's happening. But then how do they make a deal with the US government?
Yeah. And how do we know? I mean, seeing images doesn't necessarily indicate the legal parameters or the
of course not.
in terms of any kind of agreement. You wouldn't know necessarily what you're getting for what you're promising through something like that.
Sure.
But an interesting part about the contactees, you've written extensively about that, and I've just reread Man and Gods, or Gods and Man, and you talk about the nine, and there's been a series of groups or individuals that have come forward over the past 100 years, more so like I guess in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, who said that they were communicating with an off-world intelligence. And I haven't had a chance, and that's something I would like to do ultimately, is like to go back and look through all these so-called communications and the automatic writing that may have accompanied it, and look for a consistency of, I wouldn't say message, because I think that if they are adept at human politics, then there may be all kinds of motivations to get us to do things that might ultimately help out their, mission or whatnot. But is there a consistency in style or approach or something that could link those as to being related experiences, rather than just individual people, having the hallucination that they're talking with something out of this world?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's sort of the focus of what I was trying to do with the Sinister Force, with the Sekret Machines series, is that to try to talk about consistency across these groups.
Yeah.
The consistency of how they relate to the other, the abduction experiences, all of these things. We can go back through history and find that there's a consistency of detail. But when it comes to the nine, for instance, that the contact with the nine has persisted to the present day. There are groups out on the West Coast that are sort of inheritors of this, of the original nine, of some of the original people who've passed on, sort of a training, or they passed on the contacts somehow to other groups. I mean, Esalen at one point was part of the whole nine experience. Uri Geller was part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
A while, right?
Well, and along with
Paharch.
Paharch. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, and so I find that, I mean, they contacted me. I mean, actual contact.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, okay.
Okay. No, they did contact me at one point. They were sort of one correspondent was angry with me because of Sinister Forces, and when I had talked about the nine initially and linked it to the Kennedy assassination, right, which is undeniable. I mean, the same individuals were within a handshake away of Lee Harvey Oswald. So they wrote to me in protest, and I said, listen, guys, this is just based on the documents. I didn't make this up.
Yeah.
Picard talks about all these people, and then I find all these people in the Warren Commission report. I mean, there's, you can't deny it. And they kind of backed away from this. And they were trying to feel me out to know how much I knew and what was my, intentions about all of this. And this was with Sinister Forces. So we're talking about in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
There's been they still exist, and they're still very protective about, and this group of nine intelligences, and their leader is called Tom, right? The supernatural leader is a guy called Tom, and they're talking Tom all the time. I'm thinking, oh man. So yeah. But anyway, this is, and they're very protective of this, and they're insisting this is still going on. And it's, I think, one of the texts is Plan 9 from outer space, right? So they're talking about all of this stuff, and they are consistent about it. But then they go off into the very hyper spiritual, hyper metaphysical stuff.
Yeah.
Which 9 wasn't really like that in the beginning. The 9 was kind of very down to earth. There was metaphysics there, but Paharch was asking scientific questions just to test them and getting scientific answers back.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more, and I think whoever's channeling the 9 at this point is not really taking advantage of the situation, because they're a lot more flexible. It could give a lot more information if only they get out of the metaphysical realm and try asking some basic questions about, if to test this contact, right? To see if it's the same contact as it was back in 19.
Yeah, to try to find some linkages or similarities or whatever.
You should be able to test it. You should be able to go through the old documentation and start testing and seeing where it's going. But I haven't heard anything like that.
Yeah. You mentioned it, and I hadn't really planned on talking about that part of it, but the the crazy linkages with the Kennedy assassination. Now, mentioning this is like, okay, people
Yeah,
who
there we
have
go.
their hats on, they're like, oh, okay, this is just proof that they're going to go off half cocked. But like you said, it's all documented. All these relationships between the CIA and potentially communists and everything else, and they were all sort of radiating around Texas and Florida, and right at the point when this assassination was ongoing. And I'm like, baffled as to what a prosaic explanation could be for all of these like strange and just baffling connections. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it's an aside, but
Oh, I mean,
it goes to the Citizen
sounds like
Force's point you're making, right? I mean,
yeah, it sounds like an aside, but it isn't really, is it?
yeah,
I
no, it's
mean,
not.
here I am. I mean, there's no earthly reason why I should be in the middle of this particular development right now. I'm a kid from the Bronx, right? I mean, I just barely graduated high school. But there I was in 1968, a member of a church that had David Ferry and Jack Martin
Yeah,
as priests and bishops. Let's not forget.
yeah,
And the head of that church that I belonged to in the Bronx was communicating with Jim Garrison, trying to get him to release Jack Martin and send him back. I mean, I have all that documentation from Garrison's office, right? It's online. You can get it.
yeah,
How the hell does that happen?
yeah,
Right? How the hell does this happen? And so you start pulling the threads of this thing, and you see that you have Lee and Marina Oswald living with Ruth Payne, and Ruth Payne is like the daughter-in-law of Arthur Young, who was one of the
yes,
9. I mean,
yeah,
that doesn't make any sense. And all of these things start to get the number of people gets smaller and smaller. The circle gets tighter and tighter. But at the heart of this circle is weird churches, the UFO phenomenon, and weird intelligence operations that nobody can seem to understand. Garrison himself was so frustrated with the churches that when the commissions at Congress started, the commissions into the investigation of the assassinations
yeah,
took off. Garrison is writing to them saying, look, you can have all this stuff that I have. I have no clue about the churches. Can you find out what role these churches play? Because they're all over this,
yeah,
and then so you pick at that thread, and you get one of Guy Bannister.
yeah,
Here's Guy Bannister in the heart of the investigation, as far as Jim Garrison was concerned. But Guy Bannister was researching UFOs in 1947 for Hoover.
yeah. And he was
Okay.
also, didn't he communicate with what's his name in Washington right after his sighting? And the slag killed the dog on the boat.
Yeah. Fred Krisman and Harold Dahl, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So he's involved with all of these people,
Hmm.
and he's sending back these telexes to Hoover called, special Project X, right? So it's an X file, and he's sending all of these documents back on this sighting and that sighting. He interviewed this witness and that witness, and then less than 20 years later, he's in New Orleans with Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Martin and David Ferry and the whole weird clown car of people
Yeah,
based on Bank Street, and it's like, why, how? And then Oswald starts bragging he's going to get a job at NASA, right? And some of the people he worked with at Riley Coffee are all looking like they're going to get jobs in the space program. I mean, and this is all there. I mean, the paperwork is there, the documents are there. Ruth Payne, in front of the Warren Commission, is about to tell everybody she's up there visiting Arthur Young 2 months before the assassination, right?
mhm,
She's got Lee Oswald in her house and Marina Oswald. She's talking to Russian defectors, for crying out loud.
mhm,
She's going to see Arthur Young, who's a key figure in the defense establishment, the inventor of the Bell helicopter,
mhm.
right? One of the 9 talking to ghosts or aliens or something in this barn in Maine in 1953. She's cut off in this account by none other than Alan Dulles. Alan Dulles changes the subject, stops her from talking
Yeah,
completely, and that whole story she starts to go into. She went up to see, Arthur Young up in Pennsylvania, and the whole thing gets derailed. They never get back to that subject again.
yeah,
And then I find out that Alan Dulles, his mistress Mary Bancroft, was the best friend of Arthur Young's wife. I mean, it just got worse and worse and worse, And then
yeah,
Michael Payne is working for Bell Aerospace in Texas, and I mean on and on. So yeah, the circle got smaller and tighter and tighter, but we don't understand it.
yeah,
We don't understand it in human terms. We're having a very hard time putting that together. And that's what I tried to show in Sinister Forces. My point in Sinister Forces was to say, this is the evidence. This is the truth. These are the documents. This is what the people said. Do I know what's going on? No, I haven't a clue.
Yeah.
You know,
But it seems, but I mean, and again, it seems like there's a thread through American history in particular, because that was your focus, where this stuff just seems to, this uncanny synchronicities and personalities seem to conglomerate around really strange phenomenon. And that is fascinating to me. And your approach again was to lay out the actual things and not to be like, it's this, and here's why I'm arguing that. It's like, here's a bunch of stuff, what do we make of it, you know? And I really appreciated that, because it doesn't assault the reader's intelligence, and it's also, that's all you need to do. It's like, by pointing out this stuff for someone who's like, you know, a critical thinker, it's like something is going on because of A, B, C, and D. This can't just be, you know, random happenstance. And what that is, that's again the question. That's what leads us, you know, always back to the same thing. What is that root in some of this stuff, and whether or not it's the same phenomenon, you know?
Well, I think if we can learn more about the UAP, we'll get a little bit closer to this answer, right? We'll get a little bit closer to these answers, because there's something about that, because it also defies rationality, what these things do. We don't understand how this happens. We don't understand how it works. And I think government has more or less already admitted they pretty much don't understand it. So if they don't understand it, they need help. And it may be that they're looking in the wrong place. There's a story I like to tell. It's an old joke about the drunk. The guy leaves the bar, and he's looking on the street, and somebody comes out of the bar and says, "What happened?" He says, "Well, I lost my keys." And they ask him, "Okay, well, where did you lose your keys?" And he points to across the street. "Well, why are you looking here?" "Well, the light's better here." And that's what we're doing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
We're looking
absolutely.
where the light is better, and we're never going to find our keys this way.
Yeah.
We've got to go where it's a little dark, and dare to go there and dare to look in that direction. It's going to be a little scary, but this is not working so far.
Yeah, absolutely not. I wanted to bring you back real quick to something you mentioned a minute ago. You're getting the sense from people in the establishment or in the intelligence community or whatnot that another shoe is going to drop.
Yeah.
And Chris Bledsoe has, I think, thrown out the date of something of like 2027. There are several things like this. Now, people point to, well, these things have been happening throughout human history, where people predict the end times, and the date always comes and goes. But there are several people and threads that are kind of pointing to something in the next couple of years where, something may occur. Is there anything you can share with us to give a shape to that, or is it just sort of this, thing floating out there?
This is what people are saying. That's as much as they're saying.
Okay.
They're not going any further. They're not saying it's going to be a dead alien, or it's going to be a piece of a spacecraft or something. They're saying there's more coming. Another shoe is going to drop, and it's going to get even more intense in the next couple of years. We're building up a head of steam on this.
Yeah.
Like I say, the genie's out of the bottle, probably literally and figuratively. So we're not going to be able to go back and try to say poo-poo this anymore. This has become part of establishment narrative right now.
Yeah.
It's insinuating its way into Congress and into the defense establishment, into the intelligence establishment. It's becoming canon. We're getting to that point where there's going to be a special place just for this, and it's going to involve a lot more people and a lot more evidence. And from what I understand, they have more evidence. They just don't know what the hell to do with it.
Yeah. One of the things that I just finished the book, Joseph Farrell's Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops. Right. And they talk a little bit about a breakaway civilization. And that's been something that's been tossed around. And you've mentioned it also, that there may be some sort of breakaway explanation for this, whether it's other humans or even like a homo species that maybe have survived in some way. What are your current thoughts on that? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of people are excited about the Homo naledi discoveries, the Cave of Bones, and that sort of thing. What are your thoughts right now on the whole idea of a breakaway civilization as cause, or anything related to that?
Well, I was first made aware of this concept of breakaway civilization during a bunch of interviews I did maybe 15 years ago or so. A young woman who's passed on now brought up this idea of a breakaway civilization, and from what I understood, what she meant was that, you know, a cabal of very wealthy people creating an off-planet civilization, like in their backyard, kind of getting ready to get off planet and escape. And she meant by that, and my reaction to that, she asked, "Did you believe that's possible?" And my reaction was, "Why wouldn't it be? I mean, if I had all that money, you know, I'm looking at what's happening around with the climate, particularly, and you know, the rise of asymmetrical warfare. Yeah, if I had a, you know, this kind of money and I had these resources, yeah, I would do it. I mean, of course, why wouldn't, you know, somebody try to do that? It's predictable. Not that I would leave all my fellow, you know, humans behind, but I could see where that impetus would be. And then they started branching out and they started saying, well, it's more than that. It's other civilizations and maybe other planets, maybe other beings, and maybe the rest of it.
Galactic Council and all that stuff starts playing into it.
Yeah, you know, and it's like, let's try to solve the UFO problem first.
Mm-hmm.
Saying how many alien races are there? I hear this all the time. And I'm thinking, guys, calm down. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? We're still struggling with the idea there might be one. And is it alien or is it ultra terrestrial? Is it subterrestrial? Is it, you know, does it live in the ocean? Is it here with us? Has it been here with us all this time? Is it right next to us? We just can't see it. I mean, there was this exercise given to me by Timothy Good, famous, you know,
Yeah.
ufologist from England. We met at this thing in this breakaway civilization conference, I guess it was, secret space program in Amsterdam some time ago, more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I guess. And we shared a bottle of scotch because we had nothing else to do in this little tiny hotel. So, and he said, listen, you want to, you know, see how this works, just go to any public place, go to especially an airport, go to an airport or a shopping mall and just sit on a bench and just get very peaceful and then just say, okay, I know you're here, you know, say hello, and then open your eyes and see what happens, you know, and somebody will inevitably turn around in a crowd, look at you and wave and then disappear. He says, they're there with us. They're here. They've always been here. That was his point.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had that experience. I think your listeners probably know very well. They don't want to hear it anymore. My infamous Man in Black experience in Rhode Island some years ago. I mean, and I hadn't seen a UFO. I had nothing, you know, I had no personal contact with, I had never had a sighting. I hadn't had one until a couple of years ago. But I'm getting the Men in Black thing. I'm thinking, like, why? You're supposed to do this. This is like in reverse order, right? So, but this does happen. And there was something uncanny about that experience. These were outwardly human. But there was something off. There was something just a little off.
Yeah.
That was disconcerting. And it happened, you know, both times, first in Rhode Island and then the airport in Singapore, you know, where one of them tapped me on the shoulder. So they were corporeal and tapping on the shoulder, and I turned and they waved and disappeared. It's like they're here, right?
Yeah.
And they can be visible and they do look like us, but there is something a little off. And that whole Man in Black thing, where it's the old Cadillacs, you know, and the slightly off suits and this manner of speaking, I kind of believe it now because I've had that, you know, confrontation.
Yeah.
If only because of that. I can't deny it. I used to be in a position where I could say the UFO phenomenon is real because I've seen the evidence. I haven't seen one myself, but I know the evidence is there. Therefore, I have to trust the evidence. Now I can't do that anymore. Right.
Yeah. Because you've seen it.
I've seen the UFO and I've seen this.
Yeah.
So, like, okay, now that part of my shtick is ruined. You know, now I have to be one of those who actually saw something, and that's a little disconcerting. But
yeah, well, that's is my volume jumping to you?
No, sounds
okay,
good to me.
Okay, cool. It's jumping in my headphones, but that's fine. One of the things I wanted to ask you about in regards to that, there's been a lot of talk about it being sort of infectious, and people talk about it mainly in the hitchhiker, you know, realm. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on Skinwalker, but I've watched the show, and I wish it was presented slightly differently so that it would have more gravitas off the top. But I do respect what the investigation and what they're trying to find out. But there's a lot of talk about the whole thing being infectious. I mean, you know, Lou Elizondo has, like, I think a parasitology degree, like for parasites, and that's, some people think that's telling. Do you think that your encountering of a UFO has anything to do with your working with To the Stars Academy?
the first reaction I got from someone at To the Stars when I related this story, I was, saying, holy shit. And I'm sending emails to everybody that I knew at To the Stars. And one of the responses that came back was, well, they took notice, right?
Yeah.
They noticed you, and therefore they showed up just to say, basically, hello.
Yeah, here we are.
I've had a few things happen like that. I've known Whitley Strieber for a very long time. I'm just going to name check him right here.
Yeah,
So
no,
I,
he's another
yeah.
person
So
that I like.
he's a, we he seemed very open-minded and always has been, as to what the phenomenon might be. When he first contacted me, he didn't know how to pigeonhole it, what kind of category it was. Was it something real? Was it stream memories of something else? We went through a lot back in those days. And one evening here, I was finishing work in the middle of the night, as I usually do, and I suddenly heard a very strange electrical noise, like a short circuit, but going on for a little bit too long.
Mhm.
And I was startled, and I started looking all over I have nothing that does that, right? I've got some computers, and that's about it. So I couldn't figure that out. And then suddenly, right after that, it came a series of hard knocks, like somebody knocking on the door, but
Mhm.
knocking in the room.
Yeah.
So I mentioned this to Whitley, and he said the same thing that the guy said when I saw the UFO. Well, they've noticed,
Yeah.
and I think they do. I think once they've noticed, there's a connection. Whether it's you consider it like a being contaminated somehow or being something contagious, but I think there is something like that. There is you're carrying it with you somehow, that contact with you for a while.
Yeah.
And I made a joke about this at a conference in New York. I think it was in February. No, anyway, it was this year, earlier this year in New York. And I opened by saying I was giving thanks to Leslie Keene for her work.
Mhm.
I said, if it was not for that New York Times article, all the rest of us would be living in a van down by the river. And it got a laugh. And I said, I don't know why. I just came to New York from Florida, and I've got Chris Farley, as a hitchhiker, or maybe as my spirit animal.
Yeah.
So yeah, the whole hitchhiker thing is I never really paid much attention to it before. It sounded like a hokey kind of, new agey take on it.
Yeah.
But now I'm not so sure. Now
Yeah.
I'm not.
Well, that's what the phenomenon does, right? I mean, it takes your barriers and makes you unsure of them over and
Exactly.
over and over again. When I started out, I read, it's interesting you mentioned it, Leslie Kean's UFOs and Generals. I'd always had a little bit of an interest, but I read that book and I was like, holy mackerel, here's a bunch of really credible people who've
Right.
had really incredible experiences. And then, here it is like 5, 6 years later, and I am totally on a different planet in terms of my
Right.
thinking about this stuff. And the other thing, and I think that you're like one of the main, I wouldn't say reasons for this, but one of the main avenues that this occurred to me was that you expand your like thinking in a lot of different arenas. Like, I mean, you go down like, spiritual or mystical avenues. You start thinking about like the Gnostics, and you start thinking about philosophy, and you start thinking about science and the philosophy of science,
Right.
and like whether we know what we think we know, and how how the lack of humility in human scientific endeavor may be actually, deadly to our society if we don't realize this,
Yeah.
and so it is kind of an initiation, which goes back to previous parts of your work, where this functions as an initiation into a transformative process where you're suddenly entertaining ideas that were completely alien to you prior. And
Right.
I've enjoyed that. Some people might not, but it's been the ride of my life, and it's led me down roads that I never would have gone down before. And so, ultimately, I think you end up as a better, more well-rounded person as a result,
Well, I hope so. I mean, that's, I don't own that approach, right?
Sure,
It's open
but
to absolutely everybody. Just I know people want to put the UFO in a box, right? And it's
mhm,
in a box over here. But the UFO, if it's taught us anything, is that it's about everything.
yeah,
If it violates, if it violates science as we know it, if it violates the laws of physics, if it shows up and disappears, if it does those 90-degree turns, I mean, in the middle of wherever, I mean, the fascinating thing is that they would even know in advance where Fravor's jets were going to rendezvous.
Yes, the cat point.
It was like,
Absolutely.
and
He
wait there.
didn't even know, you know?
That freaks me out. That's
Yeah.
to me, more than anything else, that's the part that freaks me out the most. That's the part we should pay attention to the most. They're telling us something as much as they can, maybe through pictures, as we say, but they're telling us something. They want our attention. They want us to know what they know, or they want us to know, that there's another way of looking at all of this.
Sure.
And I think that led me down those areas. I mean, I grew up in the 60s. So I used to read, R.D. Laing, The Politics of Experience, and all this, avant-garde kind of philosophy, psychology stuff was very, very popular. Michel Foucault and all the French,
Oh
postmodern.
yeah. I'm an English major, so I did my
Oh, there
Foucault
you
and
go.
Derrida.
All right. Well, that's it. If you don't neglect that, go back to it and reread it now,
Yeah.
knowing now what you know.
Yeah.
Going back and rereading it, and you suddenly realize they're talking about something else.
Yeah.
Right? They can help clarify some of this. And that's what I found. That's why I haven't given up. I still have my copy of The Politics of Experience. I'm still reading R.D. Laing. I know he's been, attacked and debunked 10 Ways to Christmas, but he was on to something. And the others were as well. Foucault was, Derrida was, Lacan was, Baudrillard, everybody was,
Yeah.
Deleuze, Guattari, hello, So there's all of this is pertinent, is relevant to me. They're all struggling like the blind man and the elephant to try to understand what this phenomenon is, and everybody has a piece of it. We got to put all the pieces together, and that's what I've been about for most of my life. Put the pieces together.
The synthesis. And I think you've been doing it beautifully. Let me check my notes here. There's a lot more I wanted to ask you about. Okay, so I have a friend on Twitter, Tristan, great guy. He's got his handle. Go ahead.
Yeah, Tristan.
You know who I'm talking about?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, anyway, he shares these beautiful graphics, and he's a thinker, and we had a conversation on the phone. I told him I was going to interview you, and he asked me to talk to you about a little bit about the relationship between death / the afterlife, potentially, with the phenomenon. And I know that Whitley Strieber has talked a lot about that. And also in your books, the connection between death and the celestial ascent, how dying sort of is seen as a journey through the stars, perhaps through the Big Dipper to get back to, I'm not sure what. So, I mean, I guess I'm going to ask you is, what are your thoughts currently about that connection? Has anything changed significantly in your thinking or grown more fulsome? Just if you could pontificate on that for a minute.
You don't pull any punches, do you? You ask like the heaviest, deepest, most profound, questions.
And you got 5 minutes. Right. I'm kidding about that.
It's hard to live up to the question. I mean, I did, of course, write about celestial ascent. It fascinates me. That's one aspect of all of this that I think goes back to everything we've been discussing. Celestial ascent has been something we find in so many different cultures around the world. The idea that we are going to the stars and that we belong up there and that this is not our home.
Yeah.
We feel alienated on our own planet. We must be the only beings on this planet that feel that we don't belong here, that can actually conceive of the Earth as a prison planet. I mean, who else does this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there's nobody else here except us, chickens, but we do. We tend to look at this way. Why is that? There's a flaw either in us or there's a flaw in this system somehow. A glitch in the matrix, as they say. There's something that we're seeing something else, and we're realizing that this is not the reality that we think it is.
Yeah.
And I was just having conversations. I had a conversation with Tom just last week, I think, along similar lines, that this is not the reality you think it is. And it's something else.
Yeah.
Their death is part of it. Death is the great joke. It's the banana peel on the floor of reality. We are petrified of it, or we try to ignore it, or we try to, protect ourselves against thinking about it or getting emotional. And when someone that we know dies, it's heartbreaking, it's wrenching, and we don't understand it, and we think there's something wrong with it. And yet animals feel the same. You know, a dog will mourn its master for years after the master has died, visiting the grave and sitting there. You know, we've seen this before. We know this kind of thing happens. So there is something genetically, and I've talked about this in Sekret Machines Man, I think. We are genetically predisposed to reproduce and then die and get out of the way.
Yeah.
As Richard Dawkins calls it, the selfish gene.
Yeah.
Our gene wants to live forever. It is potentially immortal. There is immortality in our genetics. But somehow in our consciousness, we resist that. We shouldn't. If it's genetically so that we're supposed to reproduce, die, and get out of the way, we shouldn't have a problem with death.
Yeah.
And yet we do. We have a big problem with it. We want to live forever. That means there's something alien within us.
Yeah.
There's something within us that's fighting the gene, that's fighting the DNA molecule. And that to me is consciousness. Consciousness wants this physical sheath to last as long as possible until we've answered all the questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're here in this body, we want to keep using it. But there's a part of consciousness, now we're getting, you asked for something profound and I'm giving you, I don't know.
You're following through. This is good. No, I like it.
There are conscious training, you can train your consciousness to confront death and to go through it, to see through it, to get to the point where it's no longer threatening. And that's what we find in UFO contactees as well.
Mm-hmm.
The contactees who've gone through these horrible experiences, they sometimes come back and suddenly they have no longer fear death.
Yeah.
Or they have the near-death experience and they see the light at the end of the tunnel and all of that. And some of them come back terrified, and some come back completely at peace with the entire process. There is a consciousness aspect that we are closed to, possibly due to our genetic code that does not want us to have this experience, that wants us to die and get out of the way, where we actually can experience something that's transcendent, that death is not the point.
Yeah.
Of, right. It's not the point at all. And once you've had that experience and you've gone through it, you realize that it's the banana peel. It's the slapstick humor of life, the death thing. And we don't want to take it. We resist that mightily, that concept, but it's there. You know, the genetic code and our consciousness can work together a little bit and create a different kind of perception of reality, perception of our lives. And right now we're just operating as automatons. You know, the genetic code is telling us, okay, reproduce, get out of the way. Stop using up the resources. We need the children to grow up and they have to reproduce. And that has to go on and on and on and on, right? Yeah. For individuals to be immortal goes against the whole genetic idea. That just ruins the whole plan.
Yeah.
So my advice is, you know, screw the genetic code, you know, try to find your way, try to find a way to understand this, to get past it and to realize the genetic code is just one more thing that's there. It's not the sum total of who you are. There's another aspect. And I disagree with people like David Chalmers and the others who talk about consciousness. And they say that, you know, consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. I don't think so. I think it's the other way around. I think the brain is an emergent property of consciousness. I think consciousness has always been there. And that's just me being a 60s hippie kind of guy, I guess. But
well, no, I mean, I think that there's movement that way, you know, scientifically.
Yeah, that's how I've been led to that, into that direction. And I think that's where it is.
Yeah. Have you read anything by Donald Hoffman? He came up with the book, I forget the name of it, but basically he argues that consciousness is at root and that everything extends from that. It's neither here nor there, but it's interesting. He makes the same points that you're making. And you mentioned DNA and genetics. It's interesting. I mean, if we consider that somehow we're on a prison planet, or that an element of us comes from afar or from elsewhere, it's almost as if the DNA could be the handcuffs.
Right.
You know, and you talk about like DNA consciousness. You know, that opens up a lot of questions about like how an intrinsic part of ourselves might be a mechanism for limiting our consciousness or our ability to see beyond, you know, our present circumstance.
Well, sure. I mean, our DNA has evolved to the point where our senses are really limited. We're not getting all the impressions of everything around us, which is why we can't see half of what's happening around us, right?
Yeah.
We have, you know, certain 5 senses, or I think there's more now, but we're filtering, we're constantly filtering for the survival of the DNA molecule, right? Mm-hmm. So we're aware of threats, but we're not necessarily aware of things beyond threat. There could be aspects of our environment that are not threatening, but are actually helpful or healthful, and we're not going to see it unless we really need to see it at a certain specific point. The DNA doesn't want us to get confused, right? I actually did a presentation on this at an old contact in the desert, maybe 8, 9 years ago or so. I did a whole DNA presentation about this very subject, showing that ancient peoples, for instance, in China, there's a very famous glyph of the father and the mother of the human race. And they're two beings facing each other, but their tails are serpents and they're twined in the form of the double helix. And this is long before anybody knew there was such a thing as genetic code. We're talking 600, 700, 800-year-old drawing.
Yeah.
And in India, you have the same thing, this idea of a double helix. And there is no double helix in nature other than the genetic code. There are helices, single ones, spirals, but the double helix does not exist as a natural phenomenon except in our DNA.
Yeah.
So why would that always keep coming up? Why
why do we visualize that if we have no,
And they visualize it as the origin of our species in China, the Adam and Eve of the human race, right?
Yeah.
And there they are meeting, and it's a double helix. And those drawings are there, and I use that in my presentations. You'll find them online, and I think you find it also in Sekret Machines, Gods probably, or Man, one or the other.
So, I mean, we were almost out of time. I don't want to keep you longer than I have to. I would love to, but war. What's going on, man? You've got millions of readers out there who are like chomping at the bit. It's obvious that there's some heady stuff coming due to references that you've sprinkled throughout both of the previous books.
Right.
And I understand that you're also working in the constraints of, not to say that you're working on a timeline or something, but I mean, I think that you have to be careful about what you put out, make sure you're not putting stuff out before. So, I mean, what's going on? Has there been a delay? Any release date information you can share with us? Just anything you can, share.
Well, yeah. I had written War, completed it some time ago, but then it hit the fan. Then, all this stuff started happening. Fravor came out and all the rest of it. And now every time I think, okay, I'll go back, I'll fix it, I'll edit it, I'll include these things, I'll amend it, we're ready to go. Bang, something else happened. I said, no, I can't. So part of the problem, I mean, I'm ready to go today. The problem is tomorrow is going to be some other major thing, and then I'm going to be stuck. But I just talked to Tom about this last week, and there are other things out there that are holding up the book, trying to how shall I put it, coordinate with other projects that are going on and things of that nature. So there's like a lot of other stuff going on, and the idea that I may have to include more information in War to bring it up to date. I agree with you. I wish War was out already. There's some good stuff in there. I talk a lot about the whole Nazi concept, like people talk about, was Roswell Nazi craft? I talk about the Soviets, I talk about the Chinese. I'm fascinated by the Chinese aspect to it. I spent a lot of time in China. I used to do business there. And, the mindset there is rather different, and yet they have some of the same constraints there that our people do here. We've seen things, we know things. If we publish, we're giving the Americans or the Russians or whoever else more information than they deserve because they're not sharing with us, right? So it's like we don't want them to get an edge up on us, and we don't want to, so there's that. And some of the things that we've just talked about, the idea that we need to include more people in this project in order to arrive at a destination that we all can live with. The idea of war, the idea of colonization, the idea that we must study our role and the role of, for instance, the Western European powers in colonizing the Southern Hemisphere people. The reason for that is we have to understand how colonization works from both sides, from the side of the colonizer and the side of the colonized, because we need to know what happens, what goes on, what trade-offs are made, how we protect ourselves from a colonizer, what we consider important that should be protected, what can we afford to lose. All of these concepts we haven't really addressed. And we should address them, because if, God forbid, we get to the point where we're dealing with that situation on this planet, that we are being colonized, we need to know how to react. a friend of mine is a rabbi who was part of that group that visited the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala. The Dalai Lama invited a bunch of Jewish people to go there because he wanted to know, how do you survive in diaspora? What are your technologies? What are your techniques? What is important? What do you preserve? How do you preserve it? Is it language? Is it religion? What are all these various things, right?
Yeah.
He wanted to figure out, because his people also in diaspora.
Yeah.
I think we need that on a global scale. We need to understand it. We have to face up to things that were done that are hideous, things that were done that were horribly wrong, but we have to face up to them now, because this could happen to us. And I'm not warmongering here, and I'm not advocating for a bigger defense budget. What I'm saying is, there's nothing to do with the defense budget. This has to do with preparing ourselves for what might be down the line. And it only makes sense to consider this and to understand it and to prepare for it. And it will tell us a great deal about ourselves in the process.
Yeah. That reminds me of the somber comment from Lou Elizondo. I think it was during his interview with Theory of Everything that got everyone all riled up. It's like the truth, you know, even though we may not really understand what it is, the implications and the possibilities are somber and serious, and something that we have to take. And it kind of also, one of your points, I think, in Man was the you know, you were talking about DNA again, and how there may have been efforts on the part of the other to encourage parts of the human civilization to you know, demolish other parts of the human civilization, right, because they may have represented some sort of resistance factor or whatever. I am not, and I repeat, am not excusing any of that behavior. I don't think, I'm not trying to say we did it at the behest of some greater power, people who did that, you know, and they were my ancestors. It was evil, you know. But like you said, we have to go through these things and look for the lessons we can learn, and maybe the inoculations we can give ourselves in order to protect ourselves, whether or not something is an immediate threat.
Right. I think when one of the advisors brought this up to us back in the day, before Wikipedia, before the WikiLeaks thing, yeah, before all of that, one of the advisors said to us, just consider it, you know, consider that there are genetic strains that, you know, if there was an evil alien presence on the planet, they would want to wipe out any genetic strain that would have antibodies against their presence, right?
Yeah.
So, and this was a guy, high-ranking kind of person, deep inside the establishment, who said, consider it, you know. And then he told us to go look at Greek mythology, and he talked about Prometheus and, you know, stealing fire from the gods and all of that. So he said, pay attention to all of those things, because there's a message hidden in there somewhere that we're dealing with, right?
Yeah.
And so that's all that he would go. He wouldn't extend himself much further than that, but he was trying to guide us along ways that we can look at this from some perspective. So, of course, genetics, I've been fascinated with it since I was a kid. So it was easy for me to get involved in it. And I'm proud to say that I submitted my chapters on genetics to Gary Nolan, just to make sure I didn't make any mistakes, any stupid, you know, high school genetics errors.
Yeah.
Back to me, and he said, no, it's okay, go with it. So
right on.
So
I talked to Gary Nolan a few weeks ago. Very amazing. Yeah, I mean, brilliant individual. And he's also right out there in the thick of it now. You know, he's out there talking on Twitter and like not afraid to engage, which is cool.
Exactly. I was shocked, you know, to see that he started going on Twitter all the time and responding to people and fighting back when he had to. And I thought, oh, good for you, Gary. All right.
Yeah, and keep it up, man.
Keep it up.
That's all I have for you at this point. I would love to talk to you again, maybe in a few months. I have that. This is probably 1/3 of the questions I came up with in my notebook here and subjects. So
long-winded. I'm a little long-winded. Everybody knows that about me.
No, that's what's great about it, is that you actually get something to wrestle with and digest. It's not just, you know, glib answers that have been given before. So I really appreciate the chance to talk to you and to get to know you. You're kind of my hero, so that's cool, you know.
Well, appreciate it.
Your work is amazing, man. I just love it. So anyway, thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Seriously.
All right, no problem. I'll be in touch in a few months then.
Outstanding. Look forward to it.